Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. This is an important start in our series of educational podcasts for SkillsTrain. My name is Linda Botha, founder, owner, director of SkillsTrain Distribution. We are focused on higher education, namely textbooks, VR, AI, XVR, and we are passionate about fire and emergency medical services, educating and uplifting all. Hence, we have chosen more than an ambassador, but a change maker and a policy entrepreneur. It's an honor and a privilege to talk with you today, Michael. Thank you for making yourself available. We are very grateful. Michael Sheldrick, author and sought-after speaker on policy, advocacy, sustainable development, and corporate responsibility. Michael is the driving force behind Global Citizen. As the co-founder and chief policy, impact, and government affairs officer, he leads the organization campaigns to mobilize support from governments, business, and foundations. These initiatives have reached millions of people in over 150 countries and secured over 40 billion in support for local and regional organizations, working to provide access to essential resources such as healthcare, education, and climate resilience. This podcast is about systemic policy change, and Global Citizen's mission is to end extreme poverty worldwide. Therefore, we've put together some questions for Michael to share his experiences with us and educate us all on the awesome global impact he has on the world and Africa. Michael, I have a couple of questions for you. You can go into as much detail as you like, or you can skip the question. It's entirely up to you. But I did want to run through all of them. Your journey, number one, from co-founding Global Citizen to writing From Ideas to Impact, is truly inspiring. There is talk about your playbook becoming the standard reference for industry and universities for policy entrepreneurship. Michael, what first ignited your passion to write your book, From Ideas to Impact?
Well, first of all, Linda, it's great to be with you. And it's very kind what you said about the book. I must admit, since I've put it out there, I've been overwhelmed and inundated with the messages I've been getting on LinkedIn, social media, about how it's really resonating with people. And people are saying, it was funny, my wife, a few days ago, someone had forwarded her a message that someone had sent them, one of her friends, saying, someone recommended me this book to help navigate these kind of chaotic, divided times, not knowing that my friend knew my wife, and she was like, yeah, that's my friend's husband who wrote the book. So news has been getting around, which has been so exciting. But I guess just to take a step back, in terms of my journey very briefly, I was that kid, honestly, at the start of high school. I was really rubbish at sports. I was that kid who couldn't kick a football in a straight line to save my life. And I was also that kid who was bottom of the class. I remember one of my teachers telling my mum I wasn't going to finish high school, let alone get into university. And the thing that turned that all around was this incredible teacher who, for one reason or another, saw more in me than others did. And he said to me one day, he said, you may not believe in yourself, but I believe in you. I'm willing to meet you halfway if you put in the work. And I think you can be number one by the end of the year. And so I thought, what the heck, if this guy is willing to give me a go or take a chance on me, I'll try. And
Exactly.
Sure enough, the end of the year, there I was. I had put in the work and I was number one in the class. And, I ended up finishing school, got into law school. And, suddenly people are saying, wow, you're so smart. You can do all these things in the world. Look at you, go. But you know what? I never forgot what it was like to be that kid at the start of high school that people thought, as a loser, won't amount to anything. And I never forgot the difference that that teacher had made in my life. And so as I got into university, I wanted to do something about the fact that there were millions of children who probably far more intelligent, capable than I was, but because they lack access to great teachers, lack access to healthcare, they would never be able to realize their potential. And so the first initiative I got involved in was charitable efforts. We did quiz nights. We raised $1,000 to help build a school in Papua New Guinea. But quite quickly, as I looked into the issue and learned more about extreme poverty, I was like, okay, well, it's one thing to build bricks and mortar in a building of a school. Who's paying the teacher's salary? Who's paying for the
Mm,
school meals? Who's paying for the healthcare system if kids or their family members get sick? And
mm,
quite quickly, you amplify that, and you're like, wow, no amount of charity gala night dinners can raise the billions needed to end extreme poverty. You know, this is a systemic challenge, and systemic challenges require systemic solutions. And in my last year of high school, it was Nelson Mandela who gave this incredible speech, which was 20 years ago now, believe it or not. And
sure.
he said, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural, it is man-made and can be eradicated by the actions of human beings. Eradicating poverty is not an act of charity, but an act of justice. And so that's pretty much when I met the other founders of Global Citizen. We were volunteers at the time. All we had was the power of an idea, and we were grappling with the question of how to engage millions of citizens in this effort to eradicate extreme poverty. And it was right on the cusp of when social media was first emerging. So we used the power of social media together with music. We call our model pop and policy to really create a platform in which we got millions of people taking action in exchange for cool rewards, tickets to our events. And in the last decade and a half, this model, which we believe is the largest action taking platform of its type on issues of extreme poverty, has seen more than 40 million citizen actions being taken, which in some
Wow.
shape, way, or form has helped touch the lives of more than 1 billion people. And the book was my attempt
That's incredible, Michael.
not just to distill what I had learned, but some of the
Mm.
incredible change makers, if you will, including many in South Africa, who had left a deep impression on me, and to distill it into this 8-point plan that anyone can use, whether you're an ordinary citizen, a small business owner, or a cultural icon like Taylor Swift, to make a difference. And I won't claim it has all the answers, but it does aim to give people a start, because I think right now in this chaotic world, we see this sea of apathy where people, especially young people, don't believe their actions can make a difference. And so I think if you can just give people a place to begin, the momentum from that will take care of itself, inspire others to also act. But it's just about often, where do you begin? And as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, the co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the way to begin is to begin. And so with that, I hope the book will inspire countless more acts of impact and change.
Absolutely. Sure. What a wonderful beginning. It's absolutely incredible and such an inspiration to so many youngsters. Well done, Michael. Um, let's get into the questions. Global Citizen, led by your courage and passion for ending extreme poverty, is extraordinary. Can you share some of the challenges you've faced over the past couple of years in driving these projects forward?
So I think one big challenge, and this isn't unique to Global Citizen, I think this is unique to many organizations and change makers. When I was interviewing people for the book, From Ideas to Impact, one common challenge that people all seem to unite on was the fact that many people have forgotten the fact that creating change often requires working, interacting, and engaging with people you don't like or agree with. So much so that I did a whole TEDx talk, which is available online, if anyone wants to go and watch it, where I talk about this
Thank
in
you.
detail. But I think often people find themselves having this fear where they know that in order to advance a particular cause or agenda, they have to work with someone. And yet they have this fear, which stems often from this feeling of shame, guilt, or even this fear that their own tribe, their own side, if you will call them out for engaging with the other. And I call this the
The
purity
enemy.
test. Yeah, and this purity test which we impose basically says, listen, unless these people agree with our worldview 100% of the time, then we shouldn't engage with them at all. And it comes up again and again and again. And it's so futile. It's so
So
counterproductive.
narrow.
And I hear so many conversations that begin with, we shouldn't engage with this person, we shouldn't work with that person, rather than actually focusing on this is the impact we can create. And so I think one of the biggest things that we can do in the social impact sector is change from a blind game, oh, sorry, a blame game to solutions orientated approach. And so that's one thing I advocate for in the book.
I agree. I think you actually just got to keep your eye on the end result and what you want to achieve, and that will, ultimately bring, neighbors together, whoever they may be. You can't be seen as an enemy because you can shift perceptions. I think you need to just involve and deal with more women, Michael. It'll make your life a lot easier.
Well, it's funny. First of all, there's some exceptional female leaders who in the book I was fortunate enough to interview, from grassroots advocates in South Africa to people like the incredible Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, who I think is one of the most inspiring leaders on the planet right now, and I dedicate a chapter to her in the book. But I think, you mentioned perception, right? And often I think there are two flaws that I see people make. Firstly, they assume that, okay, if this person agrees with me on this one issue, they must agree and share my entire worldview. So I hear people making these sweeping statements, making assumptions about what they think other people like. And then the other flaw is that they assume if this person disagrees with me on this issue, then they must disagree with me on everything. And then they start making assumptions about people's worldview. And the challenge with, you can call it the perception gap, if you like. The challenge with that gap is it really prevents us from finding that common ground. And so one of the big things I've been advocating for, last week I was speaking at the Global Volunteering Summit, is if we can find activities to unite people around, a shared activity, build a sense of community, that is part of the way I think we can overcome division, polarization, and also do good. And studies all show that when you do good, whether it's volunteering or working together with someone, it's also the best thing for our happiness as well, and stress, anxiety levels, and all the rest of it.
Exactly. Creativity over games, board games in particular, in the boardroom. You can get rid of a lot of tension and anxiety, actually, and actually put a lot of management and leaders in their place. It's quite interesting what can come out of
It's
that.
underestimated, and there's a great, I'm not sure if you can get it on Netflix in South Africa, but there's this great documentary that came out in the last year called Join or Die, which is based on a book that this researcher, Robert Putnam, wrote about 2 decades ago, called Bowling Alone. And I think the thesis is still true, if not exacerbated now. But basically, he says, all of these ills, polarization, division, loneliness, depression, all of this is linked to a decline in civic engagement. Quite frankly, people stop joining clubs, right? And why? We, not just television, but with our phones, etc.
Yeah.
We stopped engaging, and you can't turn back the clock. But I think there is something to be said about if you can create spaces for people to come together and connect around activities, then that's how you build that mutual trust and realize, okay, maybe we've got something more in common. And I think that sense of community, I mean, that's at the heart of Global Citizen as well. And I think what's really important is not just to give people platforms to take action, but making sure that people can see others also taking action, because the research shows that one of the best ways to instill a bias for action in people is to expose them, whether it's for their friends or family, to other real life examples of people also making a difference. It's one of the best things we can do, because doing good, it's actually infectious. Yes. It's contagious. People say, oh, you're really happy. How do I do that too?
In the Bridgetown Initiative, I liked what you said, where you said everyone can participate urgently in the crucial task of acting today to save tomorrow. That's very powerful. Can you share some examples with us about building bridges, small and mighty in the warming world, in your chapter number 6? Give us an example.
Well, the embodiment of that is really Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados. And, anyone who wants the full story can check it out in the book. It's also available on Audible as well. But essentially, when you talk about building bridges, there was this one moment. So Prime Minister Mottley had been to London. She had been to Washington, D.C. She was effectively galvanizing support, financial resources for countries like hers, which is on the front lines of climate change. You're seeing ever greater levels of hurricanes, flooding as a result of climate change. And of course, many of these countries did little to contribute to the problem. And the only leader that really responded to her and said he would do something was President Macron of France, who, of course, was deeply unpopular with young people at the time. So she made a deal. She said, listen, if you convene all the bankers, the financial institutions to rally these reforms, I will make sure it's clear. I will go on stage and I will tell young people what you've done. And so the day before this big conference taking place on a sunny summer evening in Paris, in front of the Eiffel Tower, we organized this huge event, 20,000 people. You had everyone from Greta Thunberg. We had Billie Eilish on stage.
Oh,
And the
wow.
Prime Minister takes the stage. And to be honest, I didn't actually think she was going to thank the president in front of him because, of course, he's deeply unpopular. But, she said to me, private candor, public support. She gets up on that stage and she grabs the microphone and she says, listen, I want to thank President Macron for bringing us all together. And you might imagine how that went. The crowd went silent.
Dead
Like it
quiet.
it it was killed. The mood was killed. And then someone at the back yelled out, Macron must resign. And before you knew it, the entire crowd started chanting, Macron must resign, Macron must resign. And
Oh,
I had no idea what was going to happen, but she grabbed the microphone and she said, my friends, you might very well believe that, but let me tell you this. I went to Washington, I went to London, and then I came here to Paris. And the only leader who bothered to do anything for nations like mine is that man there. So whether you like it or not, that is our reality as nations on the front lines of this crisis. And then the crowd went silent again. People were looking at
again.
one another like, maybe she's got a point. And then one person started cheering, and the whole crowd started cheering. And just to be clear, they weren't cheering for Macron, but they were cheering because Motley had reminded them what they were there to achieve. And for her, this was literally a life and death issue for her citizens. And the reforms she got out of that conference is the equivalent, if a hurricane hits her nation, it's the equivalent of, I think, something like accessing the equivalent of $700 million to help her nation quickly recover. So that is the difference. And the only way she did that is by working with presidents and prime ministers, which, yes, not everyone's going to find popular all the time. And so, I think back to that story as an element of building bridges. And there's countless other stories like that in the book. But again, it comes back down to this principle that, or series of principles, you have to embrace unlikely allies. You have to focus not on problems, but on solutions. And most of all, you've got to embrace impact over ideology. And I think if we did that and stopped focusing on the question, can we win this argument or how do we win this argument? And instead focused on the question, how do we change the world and drive real impact? Then it would be tremendous what we could achieve in the world.
That's amazing. Again, it comes down to perception. But that's such an incredible story, Michael. Must have been an amazing moment to have been there. And you pull a lot together in the good work that you do around the world with music.
Yeah,
So,
well, I
what do
think
yeah, with music. So, I wanted to ask you, what do you believe it means to create meaningful change in our environment? For example, let's take carbon emissions. I like the Coldplay example and frontman Chris Martin saying that the band would not go on tour until they could do it in a way that was environmentally beneficial.
Well, I think one of the principles, sometimes all we have is ideas, right? You may not have access to funding, access to power, access to famous people. And so one of the principles I talk about in the book is how to leverage the strength of others, how to figure out, not just the problem you're trying to solve, but some clear solutions to it and then how to rally. And I think, people are willing to support this, more willing than you might think. Often, yes, people are busy, but if they get a clear ask and it's very clear to them how this idea is going to make an impact in people's lives, they're willing to support it, because right now solutions in a world on fire, they appear like a lightning rod through the fog, and people will rally around that. And so, you know, for Global Citizen, we leverage the power of music. We leverage the power of some of the most famous musicians in the world to mainstream these issues, provide a platform also to encourage their fans to take action. And I think what's really powerful with Coldplay is they're not just talking about climate change, but when you go to one of their concerts, they're also talking about the solutions. They're talking about the fact that when you're dancing on a Coldplay concert, the kinetic energy from that goes into power in the concert. The solar panels on the
I know,
roof.
it's
They're
amazing. Amazing.
and I think there is something around that in terms of overcoming this apathy that many people have around the world. We need to take a step back and think, okay, and leaders need to say this, whether you're in culture, business, the arts, we have these platforms. We should be saying, like, right now we have more tools at our disposal. It's a fact. If you ever wanted to live a profoundly meaningful life, we have the greatest possibility to do that than any previous generation in the history of humanity, because of the actions we take today. People born in 5, 10, 15 years from now will be impacted as a result. And so what I think we need to be doing, like the Coldplay example, is if we have these platforms, not just talking about stories of why, so talking about why it's important we address issues like climate change, but also stories of how and how we can all be part of it.
Awesome solution. And you doing it. You living it. You're a living
Trying
example
to.
of what you can do and what you should be doing more of. It's true, but people are still, especially politicians, and that are actually scared to have a voice at times and to ask often and to get around the table and have those hard discussions. You see it in families as well. Shame. When it comes to leadership, your organizational skills, motivation, and drive have achieved phenomenal results. You went where many feared to tread. Tell us about the Nelson Mandela concert in South Africa and some of your challenges around that.
So in 2018, we were asked by some of the family members of Mandela and South African government to come and produce, the festival to mark what would have been the 100th birthday celebration of Nelson Mandela. And because he was a man of action, they said, we love your platform. The fact that, you're producing the Global Citizen Festival Mandela 100, but you have to do something to get tickets. You have to engage. And to this day, that campaign still sets a record for us. At its height, we had 1,200 actions being taken an hour for more than 5 million actions in total. And we partnered, and I have a chapter on this in the book, with these incredible young female leaders, because they told us, they said, you know what, some girls in our country lose up to 60 days of school a year because they lack something as basic as sanitary pads and napkins. And so we rallied these actions behind it. Again, the power of asking. They asked us to support this campaign. And sure enough, when we did this festival, President Ramaphosa came along and he announced that he would make sanitary dignity of girls across the country a priority, especially in schools. And what was really inspiring is after that commitment, because we know it's easy to make promises, but how do you turn talk into action? These advocates, they made sure, and Global Citizens stood with them all the way, but they made sure that those dollars went into budget line items. They went down to the provinces and out to schools. And it was not perfect. Nothing ever is. It's two steps forward, one step back. But I'm told when you look at the data and the impact in the years since then, and as a result of that tenacity and perseverance, I'm told that you've got something like 4 million girls who have since had access to period products who might not otherwise had access. And just maybe for some of those girls, that was the difference between staying in school and dropping out of school.
Well done. Thank you, Michael. How do you keep yourself focused and grounded when the noise of debates can be so loud?
So I think, one thing to recognize is the old adage that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something.
Yes.
And one of the common pitfalls I often see in the charitable social impact space is people taking a shopping list approach. They're trying to do every issue under the sun. And as Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados said, The minute we try and do everything at once, the game is up. We get to the end, we have an impact by being strategically focused. And so prioritizing, focusing on one thing that you can have an impact. It's hard because it means you have to say to other issues, listen, we're going to do that later. We're going to focus on this right now. But ultimately, if you want to change lives, that's what you need to do. Because, you know, in advocacy, for instance, and anyone who's worked in activism or advocacy will tell you that 90% of the hurdle is often getting in the room with a decision maker. But I see it too often when someone gets into the room, they like, then it's almost like they're overwhelmed by the fact that they've got someone who can make a difference, but they just basically give everything to them, and you can see the person's eyes glazing over. And so I'm like, okay, well, that person's never going to meet with you again. They're overwhelmed. You've given them so much, they don't even know what to focus on. So as much as hard as it is, and I talk about this in the very first step in the book, we have to prioritize and recognize that each organization, each entity, if it focuses on its own value proposition, what it does well, that's also how you get better partnerships. Too many orgs try and do everything and reinvent the wheel rather than recognizing this is my space. How do I then leverage the strengths of others as well? And so if we did that, it would be more efficient, we would drive more impact, and it would be a far better use of resources as well.
Well said, and probably less arguments. And Mike,
Exactly.
for those in corporate roles, how can they align their day-to-day decisions with larger social impact goals, would you say?
So I think for organizations and businesses, first of all, we have to recognize that this is in our interest, right? When you take issues like climate change, you look at America, the wealthiest economy on the planet. I read a report in the last few years that said that amongst some of the biggest economies in the world, corporate assets in the US are most exposed to climate change. You see it wildfires, flooding, hurricanes. So this is impacting even the wealthiest economies, right?
Yeah.
So
Look at the
businesses,
Palisade fires, for example.
no,
Most expensive
exactly.
real estate in the world, Malibu.
Exactly. And now you can't get insurance for some of those houses, for some of those businesses. And then again, to quote Prime Minister Motley, she's a very wise woman, if you're uninsurable, you're uninvestable, right? And so we have to
Interesting.
recognize businesses have to recognize that actually, okay, there is a self-interest here to recognize the risk that these climate events pose, to recognize that we have to build resilience into our supply chains, and also to recognize that being part of the solution, it's actually setting you up for the comparative advantage. You know, when you're looking at incoming regulations, when you're looking at where Gen Z and what's driving their consumer behavior, right? They are going to, this is a trend that isn't going away. We're seeing over the long term. And so businesses taking a long-term view, there is only one self-interested outcome here, and that's that you've got to be serious about these issues like climate change. And in the same way, you've also got to look at Africa's youth. You know, you're called SkillsTrain, right? If you care about the workforce, if you care about the fact that, okay, in technology, you're going to have people with the skills needed to invent, renew, drive many of these technological developments, the energy transition. Well, you can't overlook the fact that in the coming decades, Africa's going to soon account for more than a quarter of the world's entire workforce, right? So again, it's in our interest to invest in skills training in the continent, invest in making sure that universities are producing graduates with the right flexible, adaptable skills to respond as well. And so you are seeing that shift from business leaders, despite what's going on in the short term. When you speak to them, they recognize this. And I think they just have to stick to it and be firm in the long term as part of their strategic plans.
I agree. And I think many of the degrees are changing, and many of the offering for younger kids are moving more into VR so that they can have fun and play, and you get your 360s, and they have the virtual classrooms, and they have that opportunity to test all the skills so that eventually they are workplace ready. And I think that's a critical component which was never there 10 years ago. If listeners could take away just one principle or mindset from your book to implement in their own lives, what would that beacon of light be?
I would say it's, again, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And I think sitting down and saying, okay, this is my problem, but what's one key action that I can take? And it doesn't matter if you don't know how you pull off that action. One of my friends talks about the power of naively audacious goals. And he said, even if you have no access or experience, an idea that is very powerful, that is optimistic, naively audacious, if it's very clear how this can make a difference, people will rally around that. And so I think one of the key things is knowing that it's okay to ask for help. It's not a weakness to ask for help, and that there are many people out there willing to support. They might be busy, so you have to know how to quickly and succinctly articulate your ask and idea. But if you can do that, people will rally around, and we've got the tools to connect with people very, very fast and very, very quickly. I see it all the time. And you don't need to be the most famous, most powerful, or the most wealthiest person in order to do that.
You can definitely make a difference. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today. It's been incredible and we value you. Thank you to Nolene and the Ladybugs team for putting this together. For any questions or answers, if you want to reach out, any sales of the book, please feel free to reach out to SkillsTrain or to Ladybugs. I'm sure Michael will also make himself available for any further questions or answers that maybe come our way.